I was a mere child of 5 when the heavy iron doors of a juvenile institution slammed shut behind me, severing me from my father's warmth. By the time I turned 18 and walked out into the cold sunlight, my family had been systematically erased from existence. The only solid remnant of my father, David Clarke, was an old, weathered wooden box left in the hands of a trusted ally. Inside lay a $50 million check, 49% of a massive conglomerate's shares, and a handwritten journal. That journal was a chronicle of blood and betrayal, revealing that the very people my father had elevated had driven a knife into his back. Tucked between the pages was a photograph of the conspirators laughing and drinking at a summer party. My father's final written words begged me to forgive them, to choose peace, and to live a normal life. But as I stared at their radiant, mocking smiles, a cold fire ignited in my chest. I swore an absolute, uncompromising oath of vengeance. I buried the name Amanda Clarke, assumed the identity of Emily Thorne, and rented the exact beachfront villa where I had spent my innocent childhood. The current leaseholder was Lydia Davis, the very monster who had orchestrated my father's public ruin. The elite of the Hamptons moved in predictable circles, making Lydia incredibly easy to track. I trailed her to a high-end luxury hotel, expecting her to meet a business associate, but instead I witnessed a shocking betrayal. Conrad Grayson, the powerful patriarch and husband of Lydia's best friend, Victoria, arrived at her private suite. That single sordid sight sparked a lethal, brilliant idea in my mind. Slipping into the hotel's staff quarters, I easily disguised myself as a room service waitress carrying a silver tray with a bowl of hot soup. I entered their dim room while they were utterly distracted by each other. With practiced, invisible precision, I slipped a calculated dose of toxin into Conrad's bowl. The chemical reaction was devastatingly fast. Within moments of tasting the soup, Conrad gasped, clutching his chest as a simulated massive heart attack brought him crashing to the floor. When the flashing lights of the ambulance arrived, Lydia stood frozen at the doorway, paralyzed by sheer terror and the threat of exposure. I watched calmly from a distance, then walked right up to her, putting on a face of perfect innocence. "Oh my God, is that your husband? Do you need help?" I gasped. Trapped by guilt, Lydia panicked, turned away, and sprinted blindly into the crowd. At the hospital, Victoria discovered it was only severe food poisoning, but the hotel pajamas Conrad wore proved his infidelity. She leaned over his bed and hissed, "Don't you ever do that again." To utterly shatter a decade-long ironclad friendship, I decided to weaponize this secret at Victoria's exclusive charity auction, hosted on a massive multi-million-dollar yacht. The air was thick with wealth and hypocrisy as I elegantly navigated the crowd, tracking my targets. I chose the perfect psychological moment, stepping into the light just as Victoria and Lydia were conversing near the railing. "We actually met yesterday at the hotel," I said, offering a tight, flawless social smile. "I do hope your husband is recovering well, Mrs. Grayson." The words landed like a physical blow. Victoria instantly caught the sudden suffocating terror paralyzing Lydia's face and realized the horrific truth of the affair. Her expression turned to pure, icy fury. In a devastating display of social execution, Victoria publicly returned Lydia's expensive crystal gift right there on the deck. She then raised her hand, summoning tight-lipped security guards to forcibly and publicly escort a weeping Lydia off the yacht. My first strike had successfully isolated my enemy. My next target was Daniel Grayson, Victoria's only son and the heir to the family empire. Old trial footage had proved a devastating truth. Victoria, the woman my father had loved most, was the first to testify against him. I would use her son to tear her world apart. However, the absolute secrecy I thought I operated in was shattered that very night. I returned to my darkened beachfront villa, my senses instantly alerting me to a foreign presence in the shadows. Suddenly, a figure lunged at me from the dark. Relying on years of intense martial arts training, I parried the strike, swept his legs, and slammed him hard against the floor, pinning his throat. As his breath caught, the intruder managed to choke out, "My name is Nolan. Stop." I froze, recognizing the gaunt face. Nolan Ross was a brilliant, eccentric tech billionaire, but to me, he was the skinny kid who had picked me up in a sports car the day I left prison. He had been an investor backed by my father in his early days. "I want to help you," Nolan insisted, gasping for air as I slowly released my grip. "Your father was a good man, and I owe him everything. If you refuse my alliance, look out, because I can become a far more dangerous enemy than any of the Graysons." Realizing his resources were unmatched, I reluctantly accepted his presence in my shadow. To draw closer to Daniel, I attended an elite polo match hosted by the Graysons the following afternoon. There, I ran into Bill Harmon, my late father's former best friend who had ruthlessly turned against him during the trial for a massive payout. A decade of greed and high society had completely blinded Bill. He looked right at me and didn't recognize the little girl he used to bounce on his knee. Playing the role of a wealthy, sophisticated foreign investor, I stroked his massive ego, gaining his trust so effortlessly that he eagerly invited me to a private business dinner. The following morning, I visited his high-rise investment firm, where he proudly boasted about his soaring profits, which were heavily fueled by insider gossip from Victoria Grayson. Bill tried to lure me into investing my vast capital into his funds, but I politely declined, using his disappointment to feed him a fabricated insider tip. I casually mentioned that Nolan Ross's global tech group was secretly finalizing a massive unannounced partnership with Allcom Cellular, a move that would cause the stock to skyrocket overnight. Greed completely blinded his professional judgment. The next morning, a strategically placed media leak falsely announced the Allcom partnership, sending the stock into a frenzy. I called Bill, acting frantic and breathless on the phone, urging him to buy immediately before the window closed. Seeing Nolan's name associated with it, Bill took the bait completely. He didn't just use my fake capital, he illegally mobilized his entire company's core investment funds, buying every single available share on the market in an adrenaline-fueled gamble. While Bill was popping champagne in his office, celebrating what he believed to be overnight legendary wealth, Nolan executed the trap. A live high-definition video broadcast leaked onto every major financial news network online. Nolan Ross publicly declared that the Allcom partnership rumor was a total fabrication caused by a malicious internal leak, stating his company had no interest in the deal. Instantly, the market went into a tailspin, and Allcom shares plummeting to absolute zero within minutes. Bill's entire financial portfolio, along with his clients' fortunes, was totally wiped out in a single afternoon. Panicking and sweating profusely, he screamed at his terrified staff to destroy the records and cover up the transaction. But he was far too late. I was already sitting calmly in my villa with a copied digital file of his master investor list, personally calling his most powerful clients to expose his desperate fraud. Within a matter of hours, federal agents swarmed his office. Bill Harmon was led out in handcuffs, facing multiple counts of securities fraud and decades behind bars. Two down, I thought, as I crossed his face off the photograph. But the Graysons were watching, and Victoria was already growing deeply suspicious of the mysterious new girl next door. Victoria Grayson's suspicion was an apex predator's instinct. She could smell a threat from miles away. Her private investigator had dug deep into my vast finances, uncovering an international fortune that seemed to appear out of thin air, making her highly alarmed. Seeking to unmask me, she extended an icy invitation to her sprawling mansion under the guise of a casual afternoon tea. Our tense psychological sparring was abruptly interrupted when Conrad walked into the drawing room accompanied by Senator Kingsley. Kingsley was the ruthless, highly ambitious federal prosecutor who had deliberately fabricated evidence to wrongfully convict my father, using that high-profile treason case as a launching pad for his own political career. Tonight, Kingsley was hosting a multi-million-dollar campaign fundraiser right on the Graysons' immaculate manicured lawn. Suddenly, mid-conversation, his assistant rushed in, pale-faced, and handed the senator a tablet. The screen displayed a freshly leaked damning video of Kingsley entering a secluded luxury apartment with his deeply pregnant ex-girlfriend. Absolute panic rippled through the room. Left with no choice and his reputation hanging by a thread, Kingsley forced a plastic smile and stepped onto the brightly lit outdoor stage to address the wealthy donors. As the corrupt politician looked up at the teleprompter to deliver his speech, Nolan's remote hack overrode the system. My custom text flashed in bold, glowing letters across the glass. "Find the girl in the red dress. Happy Father's Day." Right at that exact second, the heavily pregnant woman stepped into the bright lights of the crowd, wearing a striking, vivid crimson dress. Paralyzed by absolute shock and realizing his entire secret life was compromised, Kingsley choked on his words and announced his immediate, permanent withdrawal from politics. Backstage, the aftermath was pure chaos. Kingsley's assistant frantically revealed that the senator had supposedly been texting the woman and had even purchased her plane ticket directly from his personal computer. In reality, Nolan had seamlessly backdoored his network, and I had covertly planted the digital trail during a brief distraction. My cold, calculated ruthlessness sent a visible chill down Nolan's spine as he watched the politician's life crumble. The very next morning, I learned Victoria was hosting an exclusive, ultra-private therapy tea session with Dr. Michelle Banks, the renowned celebrity psychologist who had kept me psychologically captive in an isolated facility for 10 agonizing years during my childhood. Dr. Banks had been paid handsomely by the elite to ensure the young daughter of David Clarke grew up believing her father was a monster. I signed up for the session immediately under my false identity. During the sophisticated event, while the wealthy guests sipped champagne, I smoothly swapped the presentation disc in the media room. Instead of showcasing the doctor's extensive charity work, the massive screen suddenly broadcasted hidden camera recordings of the elite's most private, deeply guarded therapy sessions. The room fell into a suffocating silence as Victoria's voice echoed through the speakers, coldly confessing that she deeply regretted ever having a daughter. Enraged and utterly humiliated in front of her peers, Victoria's eyes flashed with murderous intent. She immediately retreated to her study and ordered her dangerous loyal fixer, Frank, to eliminate the psychologist permanently to prevent further exposure. I had spent an entire grueling year posing as a patient just to copy those highly encrypted files. But Nolan confronted me bitterly back at the villa, accusing me of hurting innocent patients just to tear down Victoria. What neither Nolan nor I anticipated was the dark depths of Victoria's original involvement. New documents revealed she was the mastermind who had personally financed my childhood brainwashing. Suddenly, the shrill sirens of police cruisers echoed through the elite neighborhood. They arrived at the Grayson mansion not to investigate the digital leaks, but to announce that Dr. Michelle Banks had been violently kidnapped from her home. Her upscale clinic had been completely ransacked, and multiple terrified witnesses reported hearing Victoria's explicit death threats earlier that day. Soon enough, an anonymous digital tip guided the local police to rescue the traumatized doctor from a damp, abandoned warehouse. However, Victoria plunged into absolute panic when breaking news media revealed that the warehouse was legally owned by a shell company belonging directly to the Grayson family. To desperately divert the spiraling media scandal and rebuild their public image, Victoria hastily organized a massive, high-profile gala. In a stroke of pure, manipulative genius, she publicly invited the surviving victims and families of my father's framed commercial treason case, intending to paint herself as a compassionate benefactor. I easily secured a VIP invitation to the grand gala, but my preparations were abruptly shattered when a vengeful Lydia Davis suddenly appeared at my front door. Having tracked my movements, she aggressively threatened to expose my real past to Victoria if I didn't immediately legally return her beachfront house. I looked at her with cold indifference, flatly refused her demands, and covertly ordered her remaining belongings to be packed and shipped away. At the gala, a desperate Lydia tried to reconcile with an icy Victoria, but she was cruelly mocked and rejected by the high society queen. Crushed and pushed to the brink, Lydia returned to her empty apartment, where she accidentally discovered a tiny high-tech hidden camera that Nolan had carelessly left inside one of her packed boxes. Intrigued, she booted up her computer and began analyzing an old grainy Grayson summer party photo. Using a heavy magnifying glass, Lydia carefully inspected the background. Her breath hitched as she realized the catering waitress serving drinks in the background a decade ago was the exact same woman posing as Emily Thorne today. Nolan caught this revelation on his live feed and panicked completely. "Emily, she knows! Your entire identity is about to blow up!" Nolan screamed into my earpiece. I remained completely calm, ordering him to immediately erase my real name from the historical catering database and break into Lydia's high-rise penthouse to retrieve the physical photograph before my cover collapsed. At the exact same time, a suspicious Victoria sent her brutal fixer Frank to search Lydia's apartment for any blackmail material. Frank arrived first, tossing the place until he uncovered the hidden tea party desk and a handwritten speech exposing the Graysons' historical financial crimes. Convinced that Lydia was the mastermind behind the recent kidnappings and leaks, Frank blindsided her in the moment she walked through the door. She fought back with desperate, wild energy, but the powerful operative easily overpowered her, lifting her up and throwing her body off the fifth-story balcony, framing it as a tragic suicide. Nolan, who was climbing to the roof to escape the building's tripped security alarms, looked down in absolute horror and saw Lydia's lifeless body sprawled across a shattered yellow taxi. He fled the scene in deep trauma, completely shaken by the brutality of our war. Back at my villa, a trembling Nolan reviewed his hidden camera footage and caught Frank committing the cold-blooded murder. Traumatized, he begged me to take it to the police, but I steadfastly refused. Instead, I anonymously emailed the footage directly to Conrad to force Frank completely out of the picture. Horrified by his fixer's sloppy exposure, Conrad handed Frank a massive check and a private jet ticket, ordering him to flee the country immediately. Horrified by his fixer's sloppy exposure, Conrad handed Frank a massive check and a private jet ticket, ordering him to flee the country immediately. Feeling utterly betrayed after 20 years of dirty service, Frank stormed out in a venomous rage. He extracted the lobby security footage from the night of the murder and realized Nolan had entered the building right after him. Frank traced the electronic connection, ambushed Nolan at a holiday party, and held a loaded gun to his terrified head. I interrupted them just in time, and though Frank fled into the night, he realized from the shadows that it was I, the true mastermind. He broke into my house, tracked down my sealed juvenile records, and discovered my photo file belonged to a completely different woman. He followed the address to a dark dive bar, finding the real Emily Thorne dancing on stage. Frank cornered her in the back, pulling out a photograph of me standing next to Daniel Grayson. "You're the real Emily Thorne, and she is Amanda Clarke," he whispered with a sadistic grin. Terrified but sharp, she agreed to tell him everything in a private alleyway. Frank immediately dialed Victoria, shouting into his phone, "You were right about Emily!" But the line abruptly cut off in the static. To protect my secret and her own freedom, the real Emily had brutally executed Frank right there in the alleyway, dumping his blood-stained body into the heavy brush. Meanwhile, Lydia miraculously woke up from her deep coma at the hospital, though her memory was entirely fractured. The real Emily arrived at my beachfront house, and we embraced tightly. To protect her from the fallout, I forged clean plane tickets to send her to France, ensuring our permanent identity swap remained completely intact. But as I dove back into my father's hidden journals, I stumbled upon another shocking, deeply buried truth. Charlotte Grayson was my biological sister, conceived during my father's secret affair with Victoria. Armed with this nuclear information, I sent Conrad a hidden digitized tape of the decades-old affair. Conrad immediately filed for a savage divorce and ordered a mandatory DNA test on Charlotte. To protect my identity, my contact inside the medical lab switched the vials, making it appear that the real Emily's DNA perfectly matched Charlotte's profile. To protect my identity, my contact inside the medical lab switched the vials, making it appear that the real Emily's DNA perfectly matched Charlotte's profile. Victoria was left completely stunned, believing the girl she despised was her long-lost daughter. But the chaos peaked when Jack Porter found tape number 14 hidden in Emily's abandoned room. He watched the raw footage of the affair, marched straight into our grand engagement party, and exposed the truth to the entire gathered family. Under immense public pressure, Conrad confessed that David Clarke was indeed Charlotte's real father. The family fractured instantly, and Edward Grayson stripped Conrad of his empire, naming Daniel his sole successor. Suddenly, Daniel's psychotic, jealous classmate Tyler stole my father's keepsake box and kidnapped Emily, demanding a $5 million ransom. I tracked him to an isolated lot, pinning a gun to his head, but Emily unexpectedly turned her weapon on me. Fueled by a chaotic desire for quick cash, Emily freed Tyler and took the money, leaving me stranded. Distraught but determined, I attended the grand summer party on the beach, fully prepared for a final, violent confrontation to reclaim my father's legacy. My powerful mentor, Satoshi Takeda, suddenly appeared in the dark shadows of the dunes, calmly handing me the recovered keepsake box. "I have permanently handled your problem," he whispered coldly before vanishing. Moments later, a piercing, horrific scream echoed from the dark shore. The guests ran down to the beach to find a man executed on the sand. It wasn't Daniel, it was Tyler, shot 3 times in the chest. Daniel suddenly emerged from the foggy dunes, covered in thick blood and completely disoriented. Before the police could flood the scene, Victoria grabbed her son and whispered fiercely, "Don't admit to anything." Daniel was immediately arrested for murder and held without bail. To clear his name, the desperate Graysons hired a ruthless defense lawyer who planned to frame my close friend Jack Porter as a secondary suspect. I stepped in immediately, manipulating the alcoholic, disgraced author Mason Treadwell into publishing a scathing exposé that completely destroyed Charlotte's credibility as a drug-addled witness, effectively shattering the prosecution's core case. In a desperate, horrific move to save her son from prison, Victoria bribed a corrupt guard to have Daniel brutally beaten in the showers, forcing the sympathetic judge to grant him medical bail. But the real break came when Victoria's close associate was pulled over by state police with the blood-stained murder hoodie in his trunk. A damning piece of evidence I had covertly planted days prior. Before the associate could talk to the district attorney, Conrad's Black Ops assets permanently silenced him inside his cell, leaving behind a forged suicide confession that cleared Daniel of all legal charges. Reviewing the deleted prison audio logs, I discovered a terrifying truth. My father hadn't died in a random prison riot. Conrad had explicitly ordered his execution, and the silver-haired killer responsible was still very active in the city. I baited Conrad by sending him an intimate, compromised video of Daniel and me, forcing a secret emergency meeting with his assassin. Nolan tracked their GPS coordinates to a heavily fortified downtown bunker, but the silver-haired man spotted Nolan's hidden camera lens, knocked him unconscious, and took him hostage. To save my only ally's life, I walked into the dark compound entirely defenseless. The moment the killer left the room to speak with Conrad, I picked my heavy handcuffs, freed a bruised Nolan, and ambushed the returning assassin with a tactical axe. I completely overpowered his Black Ops training, pinning him violently to the concrete floor. My blood screamed for his life, but I spared him at the very last second to keep my humanity intact. Returning home, I officially broke off my engagement with Daniel, entirely disgusted by his decision to lie to the press and protect his family's blood-soaked legacy. Nolan quietly slipped the fully decrypted corporate terrorist ledgers into the federal police chief's car, giving authorities irrefutable proof of Conrad's global crimes. The fallout from the decrypted ledgers was instantaneous and devastating. Federal marshals, backed by armed tactical units, swarmed the Grayson mansion in the middle of the night, tearing down the gates of the empire. A panicked Victoria was cornered on a private tarmac, forced by government agents onto a waiting jet bound for a federal grand jury in New York. Conrad, arriving in a frenzy, begged her on the tarmac not to board the aircraft, warning her with desperate eyes that it was a highly coordinated trap. But Victoria, consumed by her own pride and hatred, scoffed at his warnings, pushed past the marshals, and stepped inside the cabin. Minutes after takeoff, as the jet climbed into the night sky, the silver-haired operative watched coldly from a darkened hangar below. He pressed a single button on a remote detonator. The aircraft suddenly exploded into a massive, blinding ball of fire over the Atlantic Ocean, leaving absolutely no survivors and scattering the remnants of Victoria's secrets into the deep, dark sea. Back at the quiet beachfront villa, the silence was deafening. I poured a solitary glass of red wine, my eyes fixed on the breaking news broadcast illuminating the dark room. The television screen flashed images of the burning wreckage. The invincible Grayson Empire had finally fallen to the ground. The long, agonizing, and bloody war for my father's memory was officially over. I had stripped them of their wealth, their freedom, and their legacy. But as I sat alone in the dark, breathing in the quiet victory, the glass balcony doors suddenly slid open. Nolan stepped into the room, his face completely pale and his hands trembling uncontrollably as he booted up his modified laptop. I managed to clone the master corporate ledgers before handing the physical drives over to the feds, Emily, he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. And the encrypted back files reveal something they buried 20 years ago. Your mother didn't die in that psychiatric hospital. Look at these medical signatures. She is fully alive.